Hi everybody, it's Brad here with the Little Traverse Conservancy, and today we'll be tackling habitats and how animals use them. Habitats are basically homes for our plants and animals, so they'll contain everything that organism needs to survive. So food, water, shelter, air, and space. Those are the five important things that all living things really need. So they'll look really different from plants to animals to any other soil creatures down there. So things like food can look really different. Food for a wolf or a coyote could be mice. Food for different woodpeckers will be bugs, or maybe food for a porcupine would be bark. Air can be different. So if you're a fish, you're going to get your air from oxygen in the water. And even space can be really different for different animals and plants. So if you're a really small animal, it's going to be pretty easy to find space compared to big animals. We're going to do a few of these, so we'll start off with a really cool one. We're going to name all five of the important things everything needs to survive for a different species. So our first one's a coyote. If we think about what kind of food a coyote's eating, we know it's a predator. So our coyotes mostly will be eating small mammals. That makes up a huge proportion of what their diet is, followed by maybe some frogs and snakes. They'll still eat those, and then they'll also eat plants from time to time. As far as water, we know that coyotes are a land animal. They don't live in the water like a turtle or a fish. So they are just going to get most of their water either from what they're eating, maybe little puddles, or ponds, lakes, and rivers and stuff. So, I mean, they can walk around, they can access their own water. As far as shelter, we know that coyotes are going to build a den, right? That's what we call a coyote home. This can be anything from a burrow in a hillside that they dig out, or maybe if there's an awfully big log or something, or a tree has fallen and made a nice little shelter for them, they'll stick around there for the night. Air is kind of a tricky one. It's kind of a given. So coyotes breathe air just like we do, so they're going to be breathing oxygen. Most of the things that we think of as wildlife are going to breathe air just like we do. And as far as space, coyotes are kind of big. They're about the same size as a dog, so I guess depending on what kind of dog you have. So coyotes really do need a lot of room. They've got to roam. They can't just stick around maybe in one little spot like a frog might live its entire life in the same pond. A coyote can't really do that. So they've got to roam around hunting for food and looking for shelter. So let's take a little bit of a look at what some coyote habitat might look like. Here's what I think of when I think of coyote habitat, and there's a bunch of stuff going on here that I'll have to show you. So in the background, we can see all those tall trees back there. That's a forest, but coyotes don't stay deep in the forest all the time. They move around quite a bit. So if we come inward from that deep forest, we can see where some shrubs start to pop up, or maybe there are trees, but they're a little bit smaller. So there's like kind of a little thicket along the edge of the woods, and then right up in front in the foreground is this nice grassy meadow. So coyotes are going to be here all the time because this is where their prey likes to live. In the foreground, we've got a meadow where there's going to be a lot of mice. In the middle, we've got these nice brushy thickets where the rabbits are going to hang out. And then deep in the woods, we have squirrels and chipmunks. So anywhere this coyote goes, it's going to be able to find food. I think that's pretty clever. Our next one is one I hope you're familiar with, the 13-lined ground squirrel. So it's going to be a lot different from our coyote. It's a lot smaller. They're the same size as a chipmunk. So for food, they'll be eating what most other squirrel type things are eating, things that a rodent would eat. So mostly seeds and plants. And that actually leads into our next one with water. So these squirrels don't need to be really near a water source because they get almost all of it from what they're eating. So they don't really need an open water source. There's a lot of water inside of plants and inside of seeds, so it's not very common to see these squirrels just drinking straight water. For shelter, they build their own. They make their own burrows, so they need some nice soft soil to dig down deep. They will build some pretty extensive tunnels. Air is about the same as last time. They're going to breathe oxygen just like the coyote and just like us. And for space, like I said, they're a lot smaller. So they can build these burrows and they live in their little family units and they'll all live together and they really don't need a huge expanse, right? They are so darn small that they don't take up a lot of room, which is perfect for them. So we'll take a look at their habitat now. It's this nice open grassy field, probably lots of seeds and roots, maybe even, I don't know if they want to eat a bug, but this is what I think of when I think about those ground squirrels. You'll see them in public parks. They like to live on golf courses. They like to live in people's yards. So they don't tend to like being deep in the forest. They can handle some trees, but they're not like a woodland animal because that's where the chipmunks come in. Our last one is kind of a tough one. This is our brook trout. And actually, we'll talk really quick about the coloration because this is a really beautiful fish. But if you look at the top, it's all dark. If we look at the bottom, it's quite a bit lighter. This is going to help them blend into their habitat. There's some really nice camouflage. So if you look straight down into the water, you're going to see that darkness and you might not even see the fish. So with its food, it does tend to hunt around, especially once they get big. But being a fish, it doesn't have a ton of options. So it's going to be eating either insects that are hatching out of the water. It'll definitely eat smaller fish, or maybe even worms and leeches if they're inside the water. Which again leads into our next one. Water. Fish don't really need all that much water. They live in it, so they don't have to drink water. Their shelter is also kind of tough because fish don't really dig out dens. They mostly just try to hide as much as they can. So it'll be little rocks and logs in the river where it can either get away from the current or escape a predator and hide for a little while. Our air is going to be coming also from the water. They can breathe oxygen that's in the water with their gills. And as far as space, they really only have the space that's available to them in the water that they're in. So if the river is super narrow, that's kind of all they got. So if there get to be too many fish, some of them will either have to leave or go maybe upstream, or something like that. So let's check out some cool brook trout habitat. There we go. Whoa, that's a really cool picture. So you can see how gravelly the shore is underneath the river. They kind of like that. This is a nice, cool, kind of slow flowing river. It's the Pigeon River down near Indian River. It's really, really pretty. And there's lots of trout in these streams. With our habitats, they can vary a lot, just like the ones we looked at. Mixtures of woods and fields and water. They can vary in their water, sunlight, plants, and the animals that they contain. So if we think maybe about going over to the state park where we have the sand dunes, there's tons of sunlight hitting the ground because no trees can grow there to make shade. Same thing with the water, it just drains away really quickly. So it's this really dry, sandy area where plants and animals have to be very well adapted to survive. If we compare a sand dune to a cedar swamp, the cedar swamps are really shady, and that means that the water is going to stick around for a lot longer time. It's not able to evaporate because the sunlight can't get down there. So we'll take a look. Let's try to classify this habitat real quick. It's a pretty cool looking place. It looks, I don't know, pretty marshy, right? So let's see, there's a creek kind of thing running through, but we've also got some pretty tall trees. So is this a swamp, or would you call it a forest? Because it looks pretty swampy, but it also looks pretty forested. Could it be both? Absolutely, it can be both. Yeah. So my favorite part about habitats is that they're changing all the time and they can even overlap with each other. So it doesn't have to just be a swamp and it doesn't have to just be a forest. It can be a swampy forest. That's awesome. So here I've kind of put some labels on where I think the habitats are in this photo. Hopefully this is a nice familiar landscape to you guys. So way up on the top of the hill, we've got our nice dark forest, right? Once it slides down, we see where the dunes start to come out, those nice sandy areas. If we look to the right-hand side, all of our dune grasses are forming a little bit of a meadow. And then, of course, even the lake shore is a different habitat on its own. We have little fish that might be swimming around pretty close to the shore because they're hiding from the big fish out way deep in the lake. And there's even special insects that like to hang out in the sand that's kind of wet but not too wet. And with those insects and the fish come birds, and they're all working together to balance this habitat out because you can't have one without another. And our last thing we'll talk about really quickly is that these habitats are always changing. There's no such thing as a permanent habitat. Everything is moving around and interacting with each other, so they all kind of contribute to the greater habitat. So if we look at our chart on the bottom, if we'll start with a meadow on the bottom left, we've got a pretty much bare field. If we leave that alone, eventually, with it's quite a bit of time, this is years and years and years, eventually that meadow might become a forest. It'll go through these different stages where it's occupied by different animals, maybe our coyotes and our birds and well, not our brook trout, but maybe our ground squirrels will be hanging out in that field. Once it grows up a little bit, the ground squirrels will leave, maybe some chipmunks and some squirrels will come in. So this is happening all the time. Every time a tree pops up, habitats are always changing. And the best part about habitats is that they can actually reverse too. So if we have these nice hardwoods and we have a big windstorm, it'll knock down a bunch of trees and it starts all over again. It's a whole cycle. Or maybe somebody cuts down a few trees and makes a nice grassy opening. That's going to encourage some more birds to come in, maybe, or different species of birds. So that is one thing that I love getting to see when these habitats are changing around. You can actually watch them for quite a while. It's happening on all of our preserves. It's happening right outside your window all the time. Thank you so much for tagging along with me. I hope you can get outside pretty soon and maybe think if you were one of these animals, how you would survive in a habitat that might either be your yard or the local park or one of our nature preserves. So get out there and try and do some exploring.